Hello everyone. It's great to be back. Thank you for inviting me back and welcoming me. You are a really friendly bunch of people, so I always feel really encouraged and welcomed, very kind. So today, as you can see on the screen, I'm talking about something really interesting, attachment, faith and finding your fit. I could have called it a number of different things, could have called it belonging, working ourselves out, how do we figure life with each other and so on. You can call it whatever you would like to, but the heart of the message really is about understanding a bit about ourselves and how it is that we really relate to each other. So the last time I was here, if you were here when I spoke, we talked about the importance of good thinking and how it is that our thoughts can settle in our mind in ways which can affect how we feel and our actions, linked to things like hope, a sense of well-being and our mental health. So we're kind of staying roughly in the same neighbourhood-ish, but going down a different street where we're looking at relationships. And so what I'm sharing today might speak directly to where you're at right now. Perhaps it's going to speak to or help you make sense of your past. It may just even help you to understand the way in which other people experience the world for them and relationships, as you know, that we could all understand each other a bit better. Whichever way it lands, my hope is that these insights aren't just, sound bites or good bits of information that stay in our mind, but can actually move into your heart and understanding how it is that we do work together and relate with one another in community. Is that okay? So before we dive in, I'd like to just put a question to you or some thoughts. And the question is this: why is it that sometimes it can be so hard to feel like we truly belong, even in an environment like we're in today, so church, so we can be welcomed, greeted, even be known by name? And it might just not be here, it could be anywhere where we might find ourselves. It could be going to work, family, community, or other sorts of places where we turn up and we smile, we maybe have a hug, shake hands, sit through whatever it is that we're doing and participate, maybe even enjoy it, yet somehow on the inside, at times we might be hesitating or perhaps even keeping people at arm's length. On the other side of that, we might find that we're actually diving in with a lot of enthusiasm, or perhaps even in certain situations that's actually easier to do. So we're feeling motivated, engaged, interested, keen, and it might be working well, but sometimes on the other side of that, we might not be feeling met as we expected to, and so can feel disappointed. And perhaps there's actually a mix of both of those experiences, but we're doing that, getting somewhere, maybe getting nowhere, perhaps even sort of retreating, giving up, and possibly leaving altogether. So what I've just described are common tensions, and they're probably more common than maybe we realise, and especially the one between showing up and maybe holding back. So I just want to make sure that that is validated and normalised today as a very common experience. I also want to say that there are times when that feeling of not fitting into our environment can actually be happening for a good reason. And so there may be places or people or groups of people or things happening where perhaps on the inside that hesitation is really important to listen to. So as a little bit of a disclaimer, I'm not here to say that every place and environment is something we've got to strive to fit into, that at times we may not be meant to be fitting into that environment, perhaps for a sense of safety, health, our own values, morals, and so on. So, where do these tensions come from? We all experience them. Probably by now you're thinking about maybe your own and different experiences and situations. They really develop in various ways, and we can say, yes, that a lot of things can happen from our upbringing, and of course that's important, but there are also lots of other experiences in life that we can have that can shape our response and the way in which we interact with the world. Betrayal, hurt, big change, or maybe living life for years feeling unseen. So as a clinical psychologist, I see this up close quite often. I also work in university research settings. So what I can say about this is that our connections with others is not just about our theology, it's not just about our social skills, those are really important things, but it's actually about our human condition. It's about our humanness and more specifically the way we attach. And so that's what we're exploring today. So on the next slide, we're talking about the term attachment. And what do I mean? It's a bit of a funny word. And thanks, or perhaps no thanks, to places like TikTok, our social media influencers, the term attachment is much more well known, but it's also come with a lot of challenge, and it can be quite confusing. If you've been blessed like I have with some really interesting reels where people are coming on talking about or giving caution to having relationships with people who are avoidantly or anxiously attached and they're disorganised and preoccupied. We've got no idea what's actually going on there, and that's actually not what I want to be speaking about today. In fact, I'd like to clear some of that up. The term attachment in its proper context has actually been really well researched, in fact for over 70 years, and it all began from really interesting studies looking between infants and their mothers and what would happen when mums would leave them in the room. And they would get upset or cry, and then a stranger would come in and comfort them. It's called the strange situation. And then they would look at how that dynamic unfolded, and then importantly, what would happen when mum returned. And so by now we've actually got a lot of research examining this concept from infants, adolescents to adult life in different contexts: leadership, workplaces, family, our own mental health and well-being. So it's a real concept, but we want to get it right. So essentially what it is, it's about our emotional bonds. It's how we seek closeness, comfort, love, protection, safety. It's also how we respond to connection and also to disconnection. So I want to say today, it's not a label, so we just want to kind of get rid of that sort of thinking, but actually a lens through which we can understand and relate to others. So I don't know about you, but I think it's a bit of a strange word, attachment. We don't kind of go around thinking about people in our world as we're attached to them. Or maybe we do, I don't know, but I think it's a bit of a funny word. So to help with understanding that, I'd like to present a way of thinking about it in that, imagine, okay, we all know what Wi-Fi is. We rely on it, we use it. It's happening here. Our phones, it's our connection to send and receive information, enjoy entertainment, stay connected. So imagine if, like that, each one of us walks around with this invisible Wi-Fi. It's an inner kind of connectivity. And this signal represents how ready we are to connect to people around us, or how ready to trust and to be seen. And some of us have got maybe a really strong Wi-Fi signal. You can walk into many different environments and feel, yes, I'm ready to connect. There's an ease to the conversation, or maybe in certain places that Wi-Fi is quite strong. Some of us, or in other situations, the signal's maybe weaker. Maybe it just takes time to load, buffer. Like Wi-Fi, it can disconnect, can't it? And so sometimes there can be issues with that as well. And so maybe it's just not syncing too well. It's a bit clunky. And just like real Wi-Fi, that can be disrupted by life events and things that can happen to us. As I mentioned, it could be stress, change, conflict, and it can become a little unstable. If you're like me, I rely on the internet for Zoom meetings a lot of the time, and so at times it even comes up with a little message that says your connection is unstable, which means I'm probably going to freeze, I might drop out, there'll be a lag and a delay. And so we can kind of all have a little bit of a default Wi-Fi, if you like, in terms of that connectivity, but the important thing is that we can figure out how to make that stronger or work better, and maybe change perhaps what needs to be changed. So on the next slide, we talk about the formation of what attachment, how it begins. As I mentioned, it could be through, importantly, it is through our early years, with caregivers providing us this type of internal map. And in this map, there's certain questions that get asked. So, do people see me? But not just see me, importantly, when they see me, are they going to respond maybe when I need them to respond to me? When I'm hurt or suffering or in pain? Can I rely on that? Can I trust that when they respond, it's going to be helpful and not harmful, and that I won't be left or overwhelmed. So you might be wondering, what is this attachment? It's not really Wi-Fi, sorry to break it to you, we don't have that on the inside of us, but it's actually made up of two other components. So on the next slide I'll show you that. And this is where you might feel you're stepping into a bit of a psychology lecture, because we all like our continuums and different things like that. But essentially it's made up of these two components. So the first one is avoidance and the other one is anxiety. Now, I like continuums because they help to explain things in a more meaningful, helpful way, rather than it just being something that exists or doesn't exist or is only low or high. The truth is you could be low or high on one of these, but you don't have to be, and most of the time we're not. So we could actually be at any point along this continuum, and we could be different at different points for avoidance and anxiety, not necessarily the same. So to simplify that, what we're talking about here with avoidance is essentially this sense of being uncomfortable, maybe not wanting to really connect, or you want to connect but you're finding it difficult. So there's a bit more of that avoidance. You can be low or high on that or somewhere in the middle. The anxiety part is that uncertainty, not being sure. So can I trust? Is this stable? So a lot of worrying and so on that it can exist with that. Again, maybe on the lower end of that or high. When we think about what is deemed, and I'll talk about this sort of the secure type of maybe attachment and ways of relating to people, it tends to be more on that sort of lowish end. But it doesn't mean, again, it's fixed. So on the next slide, I use the word attachment styles. And I do that on purpose because really, again, we want to move away from categories, but think about it more as patterns or tendencies. A really important thing I want to say that you may not always hear out there is that it's actually more of a myth, that the style you have as a child in early life is a style that you will have for life. Okay, we don't get stuck in this. Otherwise, I wouldn't be speaking on it. This would not be a very hopeful message. It actually evolves. And so our early life experiences do shape us, but importantly, they're not going to seal our fate. And we can move along that continuum that I just described, the anxious, the avoidance, depending on our story, yes, but our relationships as well as healing. And sometimes we really need to seek that out, don't we? We might need to reach out for help, make professional appointments, put ourselves in the company of good, healthy people. I suppose to have a relief for you is knowing in this one statistic I'll show you, which I've done well, normally I like to show lots more data, that 60% of us by and large are in the secure range. Okay, so when you see these reels come through and information out there that talks about all these attachment styles and it freaks you out, just know that it doesn't apply to the majority of us, and then the 40% is made up of people that are sitting somewhere on that continuum. So hopefully that's helpful for you. On the next slide, after I just said I'm not going to talk about categories, I'm going to show you some categories. And the reason for this is that we do need language. We do need to understand what it is that we're referring to with regard to these styles. So anxious, as I mentioned, there may be a lot more worry and preoccupation. So in fact, we might be craving closeness here, but at the same time, fearing rejection or abandonment. And so that can be that tension that I spoke about earlier. So questions like, am I too much or not enough? Will people leave me? So you can kind of think about what behaviour or responses that could create. Someone who's worried about people not liking you or leaving you, you may be inclined to people please or make sure that you say yes to a lot of things to avoid disappointing others, to avoid feeling guilty and so on. So that can kind of outwork in that way. If we're maybe higher on avoidant, perhaps we tend to be excessively self-reliant and we are uncomfortable with that emotional closeness. Maybe keeping people at a distance, but the important thing is that we do actually want connection. We're just trying to figure out how that tension does work. So here the question is it safe to rely on others? Can I adequately do that? And then with secure, again, it's this general sort of belief that, we're worthy of love, that people do like us, that by and large others can be trusted. And it doesn't mean that there's this blind trust. It's just a general sense that by and large I can trust you. There's a comfort with emotional closeness. So hopefully that helps just in terms of what those labels, those terms actually mean. So on the next slide, as we talk now about faith and belonging, how does this kind of start to come together? And I'll demonstrate that soon a little more. So ultimately, the attachment I've just described, that inner connectivity or maps, can deeply and really profoundly shape how safe, connected, or even out of place we can feel in community. And so remembering that we do fit on those two continuums somewhere, and we're all going to experience it differently, which means our sense of belonging can be different from each other. Some may feel a great sense of belonging here in this room today. Others of you might not be feeling that so much. Perhaps it's doing other things or in other types of contexts. And so none of this is right or wrong. So sometimes we might pull closer, we seek that reassurance and comfort. Other times it could be that we withdraw and keep things private or safe. And most of us do a combination of those at different times. And for really the reasons of why we do this make a lot of sense. If you were to even just pause and reflect for yourself, it can make sense why we might need to keep things private. Maybe there has been experiences of sharing or expressing and it didn't go well, and so we hold back. Maybe we reached out for comfort to seek reassurance, but the response we got actually didn't quite meet that expectation, and so there's now uncertainty as to whether that will be helpful. So on the next slide, why does this matter? Because ultimately when we come to places like we are in today, such as church, community, family or small group, we bring those patterns with us. It's like a little backpack. They come with us and we're ready to rely on them or to use them. And sometimes that can be okay and helpful, and other times it may cause some struggle. It's also going to affect how we do handle hurt and disappointment. And it also determines the type of people that actually can help us to feel better connected or to belong, and also the type of community we're drawn to. So there's individual differences in what we're drawn to are okay, and we can work with that. We don't need to find belonging in the same way that other people do. So because we are in church, I thought it would be quite helpful to talk about the Bible for a little bit. So on the next slide, I've got a story here that I want to talk about Joseph, and it's found in Genesis 37 to 50, and I'm not going to read it all because that would just take too long. But you can go home and have a read of that yourself. If you haven't heard of the story of Joseph, one of my favourites, and really what this is about is this young boy. He's the 11th born son to 12 in the family. So just think about that for a moment. There's 12 sons. He's the 11th, and he is the most favoured son of Jacob. And he loves him so much that he gets this beautiful coat of many colours and puts it on him. And so he's walking around in this coat and feeling quite amazing and well-loved. And of course his brothers see that and think, there he is, now he's got this coat and he's wearing that. And so we're forever reminded of how much our Father favours Joseph. Not only that, Joseph goes on to have some dreams. And these dreams, basically the interpretation is of his brothers bowing down to him and him ruling. And he is 17, I believe, at this time. So he goes and tells them that, which I think is a really huge mistake. Not only are you aware that there's rivalry and jealousy and you've got this coat, well, now you're going to bow down to me. And so, like angry men, they're, going to fix this, aren't they? Find the solution to solving this issue. And so what do? They take Joseph and they throw him in a pit and they're going to leave him there. And then they decide, well, we can't do that. You can imagine the problem-solving conversations they're having about this. And then they kind of see, some travellers going along, oh, let's sell him instead. And so he went into slavery. So on the next slide, I've got a bit of a timeline or story to show you about Joseph's attachment story, and this is what I really kind of want to bring to life and bring home. Really is this idea that at the very beginning, here he is with this kind of bond with his family, and particularly his father, who adores and loves him, and so that's there for his 17 years. Someone correct me if that's not right, but I think it's 17. And then he gets betrayed by his brothers, and so they throw him into a pit, and then they sell him. So there's a big rupture to that bond and that sense of belonging. Just think about that for a moment, how your life has been, to then this huge rupture, and you're outside completely of that sense of safety and comfort and love, and you're completely in the unknown, and you're going to be someone's slave. And then whilst he was in this environment, he was working well. You know, the Lord was with him, and he was doing everything that he needed to do, and Potiphar was actually blessed because of that. It actually says here that Joseph was a well-built and handsome man. And so that caught the attention of Potiphar's wife, who was really trying to pursue him, and he kept resisting that. And she eventually was able to grab his cloak and make out that Joseph was doing the wrong thing. And so he got then thrown away again out of an environment where he was actually probably starting to feel some sense of connection and well-loved, if you like, to then going into prison. And so he was waiting and in isolation. So again, this big rupture in this sense of belonging and attachment. And whilst he's there, he notices two other people that turn up, and one's a cupbearer to the king and the other one's, I think, the chief baker. And he sees them and notices that they're sad and dejected, which I'm like, isn't it amazing? You can be in this situation that you're looking out for other people. This is what Joseph did. And so he went up to them and said, "What's going on? What's wrong?" And they said, "We've had this dream, but we can't quite figure out what it means." And he interpreted the dreams for them. The cupbearer was going to be restored to his role, whereas the chief baker, his fate was a little different. And so I think he ended up, maybe being put to death. But he said to the cupbearer, "When you return to your role, please remember me." And he did return, but he didn't remember Joseph. And I think 2 years passed until the king actually had his dreams, and no one could interpret them. And then he went, I remember someone. And Joseph came along and figured it out for the king. He was promoted, second in charge, and by the end of the story, he comes across his brothers again. So all this time, and I think by this point he may have been 30, which is such a long time, isn't it, being in sort of exile and going through this, and then he's reunited with his brothers. And he even says, "Come close to me." So we can see here that continuum that I showed you earlier, there's probably different points of Joseph moving along that. And so he ended up finding his place in the end. On the next slide, just to summarise what I've described, is that he started with this secure base, early experiences of being cherished by his father, the rupture in the belonging, so the trauma, the rejection, the abandonment, being forgotten, being falsely accused, but through it all is this sense of a steady presence. The Lord God stayed present with him through all of that. And it says in several times there that the Lord was with Joseph. So what does this mean for us? On the next slide, I'm saying here that just like Joseph, we grow and relate to others from that base. We can develop early in life. But of course, when there's events and relationship changes and so on, can have the potential to disrupt that. God does offer his sense of steady presence. And sometimes I will say that when we're struggling and feeling disconnected from one another or finding it difficult in ourselves, sometimes God's presence isn't so easy to feel. But I think that if you're able to still connect with some aspects of what that could do for you, even a sense of maybe it's being out in nature, maybe it is still meeting up with the one faithful friend that you've got, or keeping up some practices, that's really important to maintain. And just like Joseph, I feel like when you think about his story, he worked on having to rebuild trust over and over. He could have given up. You don't blame him. There was probably many points at the crossroads there where he went, why do I bother? These two people come into the prison. Why should I care about them? But he didn't. He actually continued to use his gifts. He served. And he showed up in the way that he knew he needed to, based on his connection maybe with God and what he felt was right. So sometimes we need to think about what that looks like for us, whether it's staying planted, maintaining connection to community life. And so in bringing this to an end and a close, I'm just going to show you some ways in which we can work towards belonging. So on the final slide, what we have essentially here is that we can belong in 4 ways. And now this is not my idea, so I'm going to give credit to David Walker. He's actually a mathematician and a theologian in the UK, and he researched different ways in which we can belong. And it's quite powerful because not one of these ways is better than the other. And they can often overlap. We might engage in all of these. But if we find that there are times in our life where our sense of attachment or our connectivity is difficult, the signal's weak, we're not sure how to find community or to relate to one another, just think of these 4 things. So one of them could be activities. So belonging through activities could be shared tasks that can help us feel connected. So essentially, it's I belong here because of what I do here, my role, or perhaps it's at the sound desk, putting out chairs, being part of the worship team. That's in the church setting. Maybe there are other environments where you can think of it in that way as well. The other way of belonging can be through events. So maybe not everyone is feeling a sense of being able to attend week in or week out, or to even put their hand up to serve or to be part of activities, but maybe what you do and what you're able to do at that point that you're at is actually being able to still come together maybe for some types of events, which is why it's important we have events. I think, services, celebrations, opportunities for people to actually show up and to enjoy themselves. So when we can have celebrations, that can actually deepen our sense of belonging. And then we can have a sense of belonging through places, really important. So an environment, a building, a location can help create familiarity, safety. We connect to that. In the same way that sometimes places can create feelings of maybe even anxiety, or can be triggering because that place hasn't been healthy. In the same way, we can create and form healthy attachments to the place where that can facilitate belonging. So a bit of a question. I mean, I've got thinking about if I had a picture of a chair, you might be wondering why on earth would I have a chair there? But ultimately, I'm just interested to know, when you attend here, if you attend here regularly, are you sitting in the same spot? Yeah, we do it, and there's no judgment with that. In fact, it's very normal. We turn up and we tend to sit in the same spot. Why do we do that? It feels familiar. It's our place. We know when we walk in, we can go to that spot, and it anchors us. And so we often, if we sit in the same spot, we tend to see the same faces, and we like that. We like predictability and certainty. Again, there's a sense of belonging just in that spot. So place can anchor us, and we can feel at home. And then the fourth way here is belonging through people. Not everyone's going to necessarily gravitate to this at certain points, but when we are able to connect with others, and if we do find that this is how we belong, relationships are really important to us. And so finding ways to connect, to be seen, to have conversations, to be able to meet up with one another, and to harness that sense of belonging. So I've walked you through some of the psychological concepts of attachment and what that means, our inner connectivity or map, how that's not necessarily fixed, so we're not using categories, we can understand the terms, how the story of Joseph has helped us to understand ways in which it can change or be ruptured, and how it can also be importantly mended. And then finally, finding your fit, finding your right fit in any particular way of belonging that works for you. So thank you for having me here today and for sharing. I'll hand back to Adrian.